All right, so in our previous video, we figured out how to dig down into the data that we got back from the CatFacts site, from the CatFacts database, and drill down into the object and the list and so forth and find the actual cat fact. So we figured out how to do that. Now the next challenge is, how do we display that on the screen? Okay, so here's where, if you haven't watched the video about state variables and props yet, now is the time to watch that, because in order to get our fact to display, and in order, more importantly, to get it to update, so if we click our button again and again and again, we want that fact to update to a new one and to display on the screen without having to refresh the page. So in order to get that to occur, we need to use a state variable. So if you haven't watched that video about state variables yet, now's the time. Go ahead and do that and then come back and watch this one. Pick up where you left off on this one. Okay, so we're going to define a state variable called catFact. And we saw in the state variable video that you also, at the same time, you define a function that we're going to use to update that value. Now I'm going to call mine setCatFact. Okay, so initially it's going to be just an empty string, so basically just a blank message. But as we click the button, then we'll put on a catFact and we'll see it on the screen. So we'll change that and then that'll update on the screen. Okay, so we have that. So we define our state variable called catFact, which is going to hold the catFact. In our getFacts function, remember we just dissected this one previously, this is the one that goes off to the database, hits the database endpoint, gets the catFact, and then pulls off the fact from that big data mess that we get back. Okay, so in this function, I'm going to add one more line to it. Okay, right after I do the console log, just to see on the console behind the scenes the fact that I'm getting back, that I pull off, I'm going to use my setCatFact function that I defined as part of my state variable. I'm going to use that function to update the value of that catFact variable with the new catFact that I pull off from the response. Okay, so that's this line right here. It's line 14 that does that. Okay, and we use what we learned about digging down into that response data, that response object. We learned about digging down into that to figure out and pull off the data you want. So I'm going to pull that off and I'm going to store it in my catFact variable. Okay, and then now I want to display it on the screen. So I got the behind the scenes, I got the machinery now. I got my state variable and I have my function that's going to update that state variable. So we got the behind the scenes machinery to update that value. Now let's actually display it on the screen. Okay, so in my main body right there, my return statement, I'm going to put a text. Okay, that text is going to have catFact. Those words right there, you see that, I have it right now. And then in addition to that, I want to plug in the value of my catFact variable. So whenever I want to replace or substitute in the value of a variable and have that display on the screen instead of the name of the variable itself, I put it in these curly braces. So I put catFact in curly braces, and then that will take the value of my catFact state variable, whatever it is at the current moment, and it'll substitute that in this piece of text, and that's what we'll display on the screen. Then I've got just some styling just to make it kind of look nice. Okay, so as it is now, we don't see a catFact there because this is the initial state of the app. So the initial state of the app is where that catFact value is just an empty string. We call it an empty string, basically no text. So we don't see any text there. But if I did everything right, what should happen is when I click this button, then a catFact should appear on the screen. What will happen is when I click the button, it hits the database, gets this big response object back, pulls off the catFact that we want from it, and then stores it in the catFact state variable. And then as soon as that variable is updated, okay, on the screen itself, it's going to reflect that immediately, okay? Or at least as long as it takes to go to the database and get the data back, which is, in terms of human time, it's milliseconds, so hardly noticeable. Okay, so let's check it out. So let me click it, and we see there's all of a sudden there's our fact coming up. Wikipedia has a recording of a cat meowing because why not? So there's our catFact. Now, you might wonder, okay, well, if I keep clicking it, it doesn't change. How come? Okay, well, that's because we're always using the same cat fact. Okay, we're always using the data at position 0, which is always going to be the same cat fact, at least on a day-to-day basis. I think they change it, every day. So if you do it tomorrow, then you might get a different one. But for today, if I keep clicking it, I'm always using that same data. So it's always going to be the same fact that I get. Okay, how would I change that? What if I wanted to do that randomly? Okay, well, that will be our next and last video. Okay, so in this one, I showed you how to use a state variable and the value that we pull off the response object, storing it in that state value to get it to display on the screen. So the next and last video will be how do you randomize that? So how do you make it so it's a random cat fact? Okay, so stay tuned for that one.